Hello and welcome back to our channel. Today we're journeying back in time to one of the most volatile decades in American history, the 1850s. This was a period when the very fabric of the United States began to unravel, a prelude to the bloodshed of the Civil War. How did a nation, founded on ideals of liberty, find itself on the brink of self-destruction? Let's dive into the critical years leading up to 1861. The 1850s didn't just appear out of nowhere. Tensions over slavery had been simmering for decades, but in this 10-year span the heat was turned up to a boiling point. The acquisition of new territories from the Mexican-American War in 1848 reignited the fiery debate. Would these new lands be free or slave? Every new star added to the flag threatened to upset the delicate and increasingly fragile balance of power between North and South. This wasn't just a political argument, it was a moral, economic, and social crisis that touched every corner of the nation. The country was expanding, but its soul was contracting under the weight of this single irreconcilable issue. In an attempt to stave off disaster, Congress passed the Compromise of 1850. On the surface, it seemed like a masterful piece of political negotiation. California was admitted as a free state, pleasing the North. But to appease the South, the deal included a much stricter Fugitive Slave Act. This law was a bombshell. It didn't just require officials in free states to return escaped slaves. It compelled ordinary citizens to assist in their capture. Suddenly, the moral conflict of slavery was no longer a distant Southern problem. It was on the doorsteps of people in Boston, Philadelphia, and Chicago. Instead of easing tensions, the Compromise of 1850 poured fuel on the fire, making abolitionists more radical and Southerners more defensive. It was a patch that only made the tear wider. Just a few years later, in 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act detonated another political mine. It repealed the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which had long prohibited slavery in the Northern Territories. Now, the residents of Kansas and Nebraska could decide for themselves through popular sovereignty. What followed was a mad dash of pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers flooding into Kansas, each side determined to win the territory. The result wasn't a peaceful vote. It was a brutal, small-scale civil war known as Bleeding Kansas. Men were killed, towns were sacked, and the violence served as a horrifying dress rehearsal for the national conflict to come. The idea of a peaceful, democratic solution was dying, replaced by the grim reality that this issue might only be settled by force. While politicians debated and brawled, the abolitionist movement was gaining unprecedented momentum. It was a diverse coalition of voices. Figures like Frederick Douglass, a former slave and a brilliant orator, gave powerful speeches that exposed the brutal hypocrisy of American slavery. Harriet Tubman, the Moses of her people, risked her life repeatedly to guide hundreds to freedom on the Underground Railroad. And then there was Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Published in 1852, this book was a cultural phenomenon. It personalized the horrors of slavery for millions of readers in the North and around the world, transforming abstract political debates into a deeply emotional and moral crusade. The book was so influential that when Abraham Lincoln met Stowe, he reportedly said, "So you're the little woman who wrote the book that started this great war." As the decade wore on, the political landscape fractured. The old Whig Party collapsed under the strain of the slavery debate, unable to unify its northern and southern wings. In its place, a new party emerged in the North, the Republican Party. Founded in 1854, its primary platform was the prevention of slavery's expansion into the Western territories. This political realignment was seismic. For the first time, there was a major political party whose support was almost exclusively located in one section of the country, the North. To Southerners, the rise of the Republican Party was a direct threat to their way of life and their entire economic system. The nation was no longer just divided in spirit. It was divided into clear political geographic blocks. The Supreme Court then threw its own grenade into the mix with the Dred Scott decision of 1857. Dred Scott, a slave who had lived with his owner in free territories, sued for his freedom. The court, led by Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, delivered a shocking ruling. It declared that African Americans whether slave or free, were not and could never be citizens of the United States. Furthermore, it ruled that the federal government had no power to prohibit slavery in the territories. The decision was a stunning victory for the South and a devastating blow to the anti-slavery movement. It essentially made the Republican platform unconstitutional and suggested that slavery could be legal everywhere. For many in the North, this was the final proof that the South had a stranglehold on the federal government, a slave power conspiracy determined to dominate the nation. The breaking point arrived with the presidential election of 1860. The Democratic Party split into Northern and Southern factions, unable to agree on a single candidate. This division paved the way for the Republican candidate, Abraham Lincoln, to win the presidency. Lincoln won without carrying a single Southern state. His name didn't even appear on the ballot in 10 of them. For the Southern states, the election of a president from a party that was explicitly anti-slavery was the ultimate catastrophe. They saw it as a declaration of hostility, proof that their voices no longer mattered in the Union. They believed their property, their society, and their entire way of life were now under direct attack from the federal government. The reaction was swift and decisive. In December 1860, just a few weeks after Lincoln's election, South Carolina's leaders voted to secede from the Union. In their declaration, they made their reasons clear, citing an increasing hostility on the part of the non-slaveholding states to the institution of slavery. Over the next few months, 6 more states from the Deep South, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas, followed suit. They formed a new nation, the Confederate States of America. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was an act of separation, a fundamental rejection of the United States. President Buchanan, in his final months in office, seemed paralyzed, and the nation held its breath, waiting to see what the new President Lincoln would do. The fuse was lit, but the explosion came on April 12, 1861. Confederate forces demanded the surrender of Fort Sumter, a federal fort in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina. When the Union commander refused, they opened fire. The bombardment of Fort Sumter was the first shot of the Civil War. It was a point of no return. Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers to put down the rebellion, and in response, 4 more Southern states seceded. The lines were drawn. The decade of rising tensions, of failed compromises, and escalating anger had finally culminated in open warfare. The prelude was over, and the bloodiest chapter in American history was about to begin. The path to the Civil War was a complex tragedy, a perfect storm of political failure, sectional animosity, and deep moral division. It reminds us how fragile a union can be and how quickly unresolved conflicts can escalate from words to war. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this dive into history interesting, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this. We love hearing from you, so leave your thoughts in the comments below. We'll see you in the next video.